guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. Thanks for tuning in. This one's an exciting dyno test where you can see a bunch of carburetors get dyno tested. Really cool deal because I got to do it with the Old Man's Garage, which you might have saw on his channel, and you got over here because of that. Thanks for that. Got to work with Bob McVay, and he's super cool to work with on the dyno. Enjoyed it thoroughly, and it sounded like he did too. So it was nice to have someone that's geeked about dyno stuff as I am. So anyway, what was tested was a bunch of carburetors. I'm going to try to run through them all real quick in my head, and I'll tell you the specs for the engine too. And then we'll show the dyno sheets, obviously, you can see that. So the first carburetor that we used was a Pro Systems 1050 4150 style carburetor. Now, yes, you heard 1050, so you thought it was Dominator. No, it's a 4150 style carburetor, and it's from Pro Systems. This one came from Dominic because this is Dominic's 496 short block. The heads are Trick Flow 280s. They're completely stock. I didn't do any magic porting to them. Now the camshaft's a hydraulic roller, and it's custom one that Nick did, but it's not big. It's like 247 or something, but I'll show you the specs on that in just a minute. But it's kind of small. He did put in solid roller lifters, which you're like, how can you run solid roller lifters on a hydraulic roller cam? Does that make it a solid roller cam? No, because you're using hydraulic roller spring pressures, and it's essentially what we're trying to do is prevent valve float. But it's a hydraulic roller cam. You could put hydraulic roller lifters on it, which we have before. So anyway, the way you do it, by the way, is you just take a 5/1000 feeler gauge, like you were doing a solid roller, and that's how you do them. You do 5/1000 feeler gauge, tighten them up, that's it. But anyway, the intake manifold was used was a single plane. It was a 454O from Edelbrock, also stock. The spacer that was used was a 1-inch spacer, and it's open, no tapered or nothing like that. We did end up using a tapered for one of the tests. And you might say, why did you use any of that stuff? Because all of this had been tested before at Gary Dunsworth Dyno in Enid. So we put this 280 Trick Flows on the same short block that we had done tons of testing for. And you go back and look at those tests. Because we've tested AFR 265 heads, Brodix 270 race right oval ports, Brodix 294 race rights, Promax 290s, Promax 317s, the ported 317 or ported 290s, milled 317s. I mean, we've done a lot. And now these Trick Flow heads, obviously. Also a ton of different manifolds as well. So the reason why that this manifold was used, in case you're wondering why did you even pick this one, it was already on the engine when we got done testing before. So I wanted to get away. It was more of a vacation. So I contacted old man Bill, and I said, hey, do you mind if we come up there and try doing some dyno testing? He said, you might want to get a hold of Bob. Got a hold of Bob. Bob's cool to talk to. He said, yeah, I'll be happy to test anything. So carburetors it was. It just sounded like something fun to do. Dominic's got by the way, he has his own YouTube channel, DZ Performance, but he has a ton of carburetors to test. So that's what we did. Why the Pro Systems that I just mentioned? Because that's the carburetor that actually did best. So at home, I shouldn't say best of the 4150s we had. So at home, the Dunsworth Dyno, I had used my 1000 CFM Demon carburetor, 4150, and it's been fantastic on everything except for on his 496. His larger carburetor did make more power. Hence, that's why we brought it. I didn't bring my Demon. So he also had other carburetors, so here's the other ones that he had. He had a 750 double pumper Brawler carburetor, tested that. He also had an 850 double pumper carburetor. Bob had an ATM 1050 4150 style carburetor. He also had a brand new ATM 1050 Dominator carburetor. And I brought, because the viewer sent this puppy in, this is an older 1050 Dominator that I brought to test as well. And then this one, because this popped up in a couple videos back when I talked about different carburetor sizes, how the smaller ones don't make as much power, or bigger ones don't make as much power. Smaller one might be because of the vacuum secondary. So what we did is we brought an 870 CFM vacuum secondary carburetor. And this time I took video of the secondary opening, which was awesome. The final thing that we did was test the 110 octane fuel was used on the majority of the tests. Did we have to? No, but just to be safe. But on the last test, what we did is we switched to 93 octane, because that's what they have there in Ohio, and ran the test again. So that's what this whole video is going to show you, and we'll get to see some fun stuff. So let's start with the baseline. So at home, this engine with the 1050 4150 style carburetor made 667 horsepower. Now here's what's interesting. At home, when I put the HVH tapered 4-hole adapter, so it goes from a 4150 to a 4500, it made 683 with my 1050 Dominator, not this one. You might say, why didn't you bring it? Because it's at Dunsworth, which is 2 hours away from my shop. So I didn't feel like going 2 hours out of my way to go 2 hours further out of my way to get Dominic, or Dominic to get me, to then travel another 12 hours to get to Ohio. It's too much travel. So the first test there is this one. Now, as you can tell, this is with that same 1050 carburetor, but the 4150 style that only made 667 before. As you can tell, we're making a bit more power now. So just looking at it, and I'll show you these sheets in a minute. It made 699 and 708 torque. So yes, it did make more. And you might be asking yourself, why is that? Is Bob's dyno high? Well, every dyno kind of reads different, but there's a couple things that might have helped it. So at Dunsworth dyno, when we put a 4150 on, we have an air hat that goes all the way up, and then it comes over to the other room to get its air. And that air is actually, it's not air conditioned, it's just that air that's in the room next to it. So it's not pulling directly from that room itself, the dyno room, because you don't want contaminated air. That might explain why sometimes when we put on a dominator, because we're not putting that hat on, it doesn't make quite as much power because it's pulling in air from the room, even though he's got great circulation. However, the other thing, which is probably the factor that makes the biggest difference, and it probably will explain a lot of the carbon buildup you see in some of the chambers on the heads I do, is Dunsworth, it's his exhaust. He has the same headers that we're running actually at Bob's, which is weird. 2 1/8 headers with a 4-inch collector, and they're shown fields made for dyno use. The difference is, on Dunsworth dyno, he uses that 4.5-inch pipe, goes straight at it. There's a pipe that connects directly to it, to the header, and it goes straight through, and it goes to these, it does not have an empty space. It's like an exhaust pipe of 4.5-inch that goes in these gigantic dyno mufflers, and that then blows outside. Bob's is different. So Bob has that 4.5-inch that's actually header, but he's got like a 5-inch or something that slips over it that then dumps into a 6-inch. So it's not necessarily sealed off. So it wouldn't act as an exhaust pipe. It acts like it's dumping in the atmosphere. And then there's, I think, then that big old tube's then vent outside. The other thing is his hat's different, which is great, by the way. He's got over the top, he doesn't have a hat that sits on top of the carburetor. Instead, he has this big old vent like this, and there's air that kind of blows down over the top of that and blows over the top of the carburetor. Nothing, no dramatic, huge, humongous amount of air, but it's like a vent that comes from there. So it's blowing air from outside or wherever down onto it. All those make small differences that might account for the power. Does it matter for what we're testing? Absolutely not. It's the only thing that, since we just tested carburetors, we're not testing the difference between two different dynos. It wouldn't be fair anyway. The other thing about Bob is where he is. If you've never been to his shop, great guy. The shop is completely surrounded by corn. I mean, corn everywhere. And I know a little bit about plants, and I know that plants, through the process of photosynthesis, put off oxygen. So I would think there's probably a higher oxygen content in the air around that dyno than there is at Dunsworth. Because if you go to Dunsworth, it's in like right next to a VFW. There's grass in a lot that's vacant next to it, but there's not surrounded by corn. That might have made a difference. I don't know. So, not comparing different dynos. And it didn't really matter. The only thing that matters is we tested carburetors on the same dyno. So this way we could see what's happening. So as you just saw, we got our first one there, and it made considerably more power. At this point, we start changing. So we go to the 750 brawler, which is this one right here. Now you could tell from the dyno chart there that it's down. So it's making 678 horsepower, I'm rounding up, and 696 foot-pounds of torque. Also ignore those averages, they're at the bottom. I don't think he set the parameters right for the averages to average. What I mean by that is it should go from, and by the way, we're starting to pull about 3,000 RPM. Sometimes it collects at 29, and we're finishing at 6,000. Sometimes it collects at 61. But I think you might have the averages set up between like 54 and 66,000 because they aren't jiving on some of the other stuff. You'll see what I talk about here in a minute. Pointing is that carburetor was down. Now I should point out this too, though. It started up and idled great, and it actually had air-fuel ratios that were correct without a jet change, which is something that's pretty rare. So the carburetor after that we're going to test should be the 850 double pumper, and here's that results. If you'll notice, the 850 made almost the same power as the 1050. But I'm going to warn you this. We did have to take some jet sizes and change some of the jets to make it work. It wasn't close. So on the initial pulls, it was way off. It was, a matter of fact, I think the very first pull we did, it was actually worse than the 750. So for those people like, man, this 850 just isn't very good. Because I know I get, you guys probably hear this too from people on the internet. This 850 isn't near as responsive as the 750. It could be because your air-fuel ratios aren't even close to being right. So anyway, change some jets to get what we were, and then that makes 796, 704. So close to the 1050 Pro Systems carburetor, but not 100%. So after that, the next carburetor that gets tested is Bob's. Now Bob has an ATM 1050 4150 style carburetor that he got from them. It's the one he uses for dyno stuff. And I would love to have more ATM carburetors to test. Hint, hint from ATM. If you are watching this video, your carburetors are amazing. I would love to test more of them. Please reach out to me at weingartnerracing@gmail.com or call me 918-520-3480 because I definitely want to test more of your stuff. I don't mean I have to keep the carburetors. I'll be happy to send them off or whatever you want to do when I'm done. But your carburetors are, I don't think they get enough credit. And by the way, they're not even paying me to say this. And yes, I'm asking for carburetors to test. I don't want anything for free, although it would be nice. But honestly, I just want to test different things. But I'm telling you, not paid. I don't think I'll even get anything, but the carburetors were good, really good. So his 1050 just beat the Pro Systems, which beat my Demon, which very few even do that. So its results were this. As you could tell, it made more power. 703 horsepower and 715 foot-pounds of torque. Zero check changes. Now, Bob's had this for a while. He's used it for different stuff. He says he loves this carburetor. It's amazing, and it is. So, yeah, his carburetor, that ATM 4150, amazing. And the other thing I should point out, too, is Bob's dyno might actually be a better test to test carburetors because on the Superflow that I use from Dunsworth, his limits the RPM that the engine goes through its cycle at about 600 RPM per second. It seems like on Bob's, and I'm not 100% certain on this, but I don't think his accelerates at that rate. Like it follows with the engine. Because you can tell it just ramp right in when it hits the power curve. It almost sounds like you hit the nitrous button. Great to test carburetors because you can see how responsive they are through that, and you could tell. His is phenomenal. Also, when he romps it, there's no delay. It's phenomenal. So, great carburetor. The next thing we tested right after that was, we've been using the 1-inch open spacer, which obviously I talked about. We switched it because he's like, I've got a 2-inch HVH taper spacer. Let's try that. So we did. And the results were this. .709 horsepower, 712 foot-pounds of torque. So yeah, it cracked it up. Now I'm super pumped because the next thing we're going to try after this, because the spacer did help a little bit, the Dominator. Now here's the part that's going to sound a little weird. That Dominator with that HVH spacer has been the Frank's Red Hot sauce of everything. You put it on there, it makes power. So far I've only seen one exception, that's on the LS3 with rectangular port heads. For whatever reason, every time I've tried it, 3 for 3, it's been worse. Then this happened. We did not make as much power. So I'm going to show you the results in a second. But I want to point this out. I didn't grab my HVH spacer. We took Dominic's. And I looked at the one because Bob also had an HVH spacer there. Those two look identical. They do not look like mine. And both of them were bought brand new. So what I'm going to try to do is do another dyno test later where I can take a picture of my HVH, which is an older one, and of theirs, and dyno test the two. They're not the same, and I think that might be a reason why this happened. Because the next thing we're going to test was the ATM had this brand new 1050 Dominator carburetor. We put the adapter on, and it did this. 700 horsepower, 701, and 708 foot-pounds of torque. So it was down. Now this is somewhat unusual because usually when you put a dominator on, it picks it up. Now that was out of the box jetting. So I'm gonna save you the suspense. It wasn't quite right, I thought. So what I did is I first took away jet, made it worse, and then added jet and made it only slightly better. Point is, his jetting from the factory on an engine that he didn't even design this for, because this is really, this 1050 was designed for a 434 small block Chevy. Didn't even design for that. Jetting was on point. So trying to jet it to make more power made about the same. So I would say if you're getting an, and again, they're not paying me, it would be great if they hadn't sent me carburetor test. I'm not getting paid for this. That carburetor out of the box, the jetting, pretty close, very happy, also responsive. So anyway, after that, I'm not gonna bother with the jet down change to show you that. The next thing we tested was this one because we already tested the ATM Dominator. Why don't we try this very old, but a viewer actually sent this in. He said it works flawlessly. And this is an old style Holley Dominator. It's not the newer gen ones, but we want to try this one. There's actually older styles even than this. So this is older, but it's not the old ones. Really, really old ones. So we put it on and we tested it and it did this. It was down 691 horsepower. Wow. So between two 1050s, so that in theory they should flow the same amount of air. And by the way, the jetting was changed to get to that. So it wasn't perfect right out of the box. Don't think I just slapped it on. Oh, magic. It is what it is. No, it took jetting to get to that. Still down. 691 horsepower, 702 foot-pounds of torque. So it's worse than the ATMs, even though both flow the same. Both had similar fuel curves too. It just didn't make as much power. There's probably reasons for it. Like if you look, I'm not going to zoom in. These have cast boosters. The ATM has the billet ones. I mean, I can obviously, which I'm not going to show you with the camera, but there's flaws down in the boosters. Who knows? It could be a variety of things between the older one and the new one. It is what it is. It just didn't do very good. The next carburetor was the one I've been dying to test. This is an 870, and I think he called it the Street Avenger, and it might be the Street Avenger carburetors. I'm not 100% certain on that. But it's the 870 CFM vacuum secondary carb. Now, here's where it's exciting. What he wanted to do is he said, he wanted to zip tie the secondaries. This is Nick, by the way, not Bob. Nick wants to zip tie the secondary, so when you open up the throttle, it's open up all four barrels wide open, just to see. Now, it's got a choke tower, too, and you're going to see a rod sticking up, and you're like, you fool, that could fall in. There's a little pin at the top that's hooked in there. It wouldn't be able to fall out, just letting you know before you get paranoid. But it's an 870 CFM carburetor, vacuum secondary, but he's got it where it opens mechanically, even though there's no double pump on the second one. And, well, here are the results. .699 horsepower and 697 foot-pounds of torque. It's pretty close to what the rest are doing. And it's got a choke tower. This isn't even one of those contoured entries like what the Brawler had or what the ATM has or even the Pro Systems. But it's close to it. But again, the problem I had with it, and Nick was diehard that he wanted to zip tie it to do that. I was like, I want to see the vacuum secondaries. I don't want to see what happens when they open, if it's affecting power, because I believe it is. Because in the last time I'd done this video, Dunsworth had two carburetors, a 650 and a 750 that someone had traded in, and he just wanted to try them on the dyno, and we did. And the 650 double pumper made more than the 750 vacuum secondary, and I thought it's because the vacuum secondaries weren't opening all the way. But I think there's more even to that. It's when they're opening all the way. So what happened was, we put the carburetor on, took off that zip tie, so the vacuum secondaries are going to open like they should. I set up my camera to record the secondaries opening. Now the bad part is it records it all the way until the engine vibrations cause the camera stand to try to focus, turn the camera away from it. You are going to see them open up all the way, but you're also going to hear it as the engine's accelerating, so you'll know when it's actually opening up all the way. Yeah, so here's that video. As you can tell, it opened all the way, but it didn't do it at the start of the pull. Now, this is where it's going to get entertaining. I'm going to show you the difference. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get Bob to print out two line graphs so you can see the divergent on how much power it's making between the two by a graph so you can kind of tell. Instead, I just got raw numbers, which I'll show you. The power difference is dramatic. Not peak power. That part's not. If you look at peak power, it made 697, 694. To before, it made 699, 697. That's only like 5 horsepower off. Below that, when the vacuum secondaries aren't all the way open, the differences are dramatic. And this is the reason why I thoroughly believe when people run vacuum secondary carburetors, they're slower than the double pumpers, because until you're all the way up close to where you need to be, the secondaries aren't opening. And I truly believe too, had the secondaries opened faster, it probably would have bogged. Yeah, let's look at the differences so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, now here's the difference between the tied down secondaries on the 870 versus the normal operation, which is the vacuum secondaries opening. Now, if you're like, why did you leave off part of the dyno sheets? These are ECT, so it just probably would have confused you. These are RPMs, which got cut out, but you can see like 2,900, that's what it should be. And this is 6,000 right here at the end. So, but really we're stopping at about 5,900. Now, the torque and horsepower, that's the reason why I said this thing's kind of confusing. I'm going to show you that. The torque's right there and the horsepower's right here. This is tied down. So this is where it's interesting. These peaks get outlined. If you look at the tied down vacuum secondary, 699, 697. Normal operation of the vacuum secondary, 697, 694. Not that far off until you look back here at the top. This is the torque at 2,900 with a normal operating vacuum secondary. 586 torque. When you tie it down, 625. That's 40 foot-pounds of torque. Let's just go to a different point. How about 3,500? Looks like it's right here. We're at 651. That same spot, so 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 633. Still 20 foot-pounds of torque difference. So as the vacuum secondaries are opening here through this range, you're not making near the torque and horsepower that you are when it's blocked off. This is the reason why vacuum secondary is usually slower than a double pumper, because it's taking time for that to open as you're going through your range. So every shift point, that same thing could happen. Now you might be like, well, they could be open through the entire shift point. Maybe. But definitely when you're taking off from a light, this is going to happen. A double pumper would do this. You're up so much more torque. Peak powers are the same, but the getting there, not the same. The very last thing we wanted to test was fuels. We put back on the ATM carburetor, but this time the 1-inch open spacer. So we've done this before, and we're running all this test with 110 octane from Fuel Factory. We redid that test just to see what it would do, and it made 709, 711, about what it did before. Then we drained the entire fuel system. So drained the fuel bowls out of the carburetor, drained the fuel cell, ran the fuel. We put 91 or I guess 93 octane. I forget that they have different octane there in Ohio than versus Oklahoma. Put the 90 premium octane, 93 octane in the fuel cell, put it into a jug, let it run through the line so there was no 110 in it, hooked it back up, and we made the pull on pump gas 93 octane, and it does this. That's right. pump gas made slightly, and I do mean slightly more power on this particular combination, which we haven't talked about the compression ratio and some. Sorry, I had to actually calculate the compression ratio, and I even said it wrong whenever Bill was recording, because here's how it came to be: 18 cc dome, but the piston's out of the hole 5 thousandths. We're running a 54 thousandths head gaskets, 113 cc chambers, according to the math on Summit's calculator. It's about 10.5 to 1. So this is 10.5 to 1 compression ratio. So I said 11.2. I don't know, I think I must have had a brain fart when I said that. No, it's about 10.5 to 1. So anyway, yeah, it still made more power with pump gas. Very interesting. Not a whole lot, but enough. So that kind of wraps up all the testing with the carburetors from this combination. It was fun to do. It was enlightening and just something to get away. So we got away from the shop for a few days and got to do some dyno testing, and that's what you got to see. So anyway, I'm sure I've made mistakes through this video, and if you feel that I have, put it in the comments. Remember, I am no Superman. That means I do make mistakes. I'm fallible. So if you want to put them in there, let's go ahead. I'm no Superman. I do not port cast iron heads. Still get asked about 3 times a week. But nope, don't port cast iron heads. And you guys take care.